Hey everybody, I've been meaning to make this video for a few years now, but I've gotten some questions in the past on how I do my line art. So people have seen me in streams and thought that it's an interesting process, so here I am, and I'm just going to show you how I achieve results like this as quickly and easily as is possible in SAI, in my opinion. So for this tutorial, I'm going to be using a quick little sketch of my fan character, Beetle. And first of all, the most frustrating thing about doing line art the traditional way is that you have to like keep redrawing it over and over again. So like you do that and it's not perfect, you have to undo and erase, and then later if you realize that you made a mistake, you can't go back and fix it without the lines getting all pixelated when you transform them. To avoid all that, I use Linework Layers. And to make a Linework layer, you just click on the little button next to the regular layer one. It's got a pen on it. And then you get these little options. One is pen, one is curve, and one is line. We're mostly going to be focusing on the pen tool today, but curve and line are also very helpful in certain situations. When I first started out using these, I used to just go through with the curve tool and literally just like make points, and that's how I did my liner. But I would not recommend doing that because it takes forever and it's going to look really janky in the end. So yeah, avoid that. So right now we're just going to be doing some line art on Beetle with the pen tool. And so first off, the first thing you're going to notice when you're using these line tools is that there's these little balls, these little dots on your lines, and those are called anchor points. And to delete anchor points, you can hold Alt and click on them. And so that's how I'm trimming down these lines. I know they look terrible right now, but they're going to look a lot better in a second. And to move them into place, you hold down Shift and select an anchor point. You can also select the middle of the line, and that'll like work the whole thing, but the ones at the end will stay put. And so you can hold Shift to move either certain anchor points or the whole line, and then you can hold Alt to delete sections of lines, or you can delete just a certain anchor point. So I'm going to fix these up real quick with Shift and Alt. Here we go. And I don't like how these aren't connected right now. So to connect them, you can hold Control Shift and then drag from one anchor point to the other. You can also do that from the middle of a line. You don't have to choose just the end. So Control Shift, and now it's all one big line. But one thing to remember is that you can't connect a line to itself. So if I try to drag from the end of this line to the other end of the line, it's not going to do anything. All right, and the next tool that I like to use all the time is called pressure. So pressure and weight are kind of similar in that they change the thickness and the density of your line. Well, not the density, just the thickness. We'll focus on that right now. So if we're using weight, so our thickness of our line right now is 12. But if we don't want it to be 12, if say we want it to be 30, we can just click on it with weight and it'll be 30 now. But if we want to change the thickness of just a certain anchor point, we can just use the pressure tool, which is really cool. Drag to the right to thicken it, drag to the left to thin it out. And we can also select different anchor points to perform the same action on multiple points. So say I wanted this one to be thick, this one to be thick, and then these other two to be thin. So I can select these two by holding down Control and dragging. So Control, drag to select your anchor points, and then just select one and right drag, and it thickens it up. To deselect, we hold Control and we right click. So Control right click and then Control drag to select these other ones, and then drag to the left. And that's pretty neat. All right. But side 2 actually does have a tool for density pressure. So if we go to pressure in side 2, let's thicken these up. We can actually change the opacity of these anchor points in side 2. I don't know what you would use that for, but just keep that in mind. I think it's pretty cool. All right, and so now that we know how to work with pressure, what I like to do with my line art is I like to thicken up any corners of my line art, anywhere where my lines meet. Wherever there's like an angle or a joint or something, I like those to be thick, and then lines that go inward, I like to be thin. So I'm going to select all these points on Beetle's head. We're just going to thicken those up. And then if these hotkeys are like just a lot to remember for you, or they're kind of confusing, the edit tool is really great because it has all these options, and it has all the hotkeys there too. So if you don't want to use a hotkey for some reason, like say like all you want to do is just move this point around, you can just select translate and move it around. Maybe you just want to delete something, you can just choose delete and pick it out. But what I use this for is pointed and rounded. So we'll demonstrate this with the curve tool. So when we make a line with the curve tool, you see how it's like round here, as opposed to the line tool, it's pointed. We can actually make these lines on the curve tool pointed as well by using the pointed and rounded. So if you just want one to be pointed, use the edit tool. For some reason, there is conflicting hotkeys when you're using this in SAI. It says Control-Alt, but when you try to do that, it's also the hotkey for changing the size of your brush. So there's probably a way to fix that somewhere in the options, but I just never got around to it. So I just like to use edit for pointed and rounded. All right, now that I have this written down, just remember that Alt deletes it. I'm holding down Alt. Control adds anchor points and also selects them if you click and drag, and then Shift will move it. And then keep in mind, if you want to move like your entire line with the move tool or something, if you have an anchor point selected, it'll only do it to that selected anchor point. So always remember to deselect your anchor points after you're done editing. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to do the rest of my liner until I notice a mistake in my anatomy. And then I'm going to use the transform tools, which is it's really great that the transform tools also work with these. And I'll show you guys how that incorporates into my workflow. Oh, and another thing I just remembered is if you try to connect two lines that have a different thickness, see how the thickness of this line is 12 and the thickness of this line is 1. If you try to connect those two, the smaller one will adopt the thickness of the bigger one. So this has a thickness of 12 now, so just keep that in mind. Oh, I don't think I mentioned this, but if you want to duplicate a line, what you can do is hold Control and Shift like you would to connect two lines. You can also duplicate it by clicking between two anchor points. So if you hold between two anchor points and drag, it'll duplicate your line, but if you click and drag between two anchor points on two lines, it'll connect them. All right, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to tilt Beetle's hips a little bit. So to do that, I'm going to Control and I'm going to drag all these anchor points that I need. And then what we can do is either we can just hit Control T right here and we can edit it, which is really great because since they're vector lines, they're not going to get all pixelated and warped like it normally would if it was a raster layer. And so we can do that, or we can hit Control X and then Control V and just manipulate it on its own. If you cut vector lines, they will paste as vector lines. Like, see how it's still a Linework layer right here? But sometimes there's a glitch that you can get where if you have like something selected on your canvas, then if you try to cut and paste, it'll paste as like a regular raster layer. So if you're having issues for some reason, just try hitting Control D. I know it's not doing it right now, but that is a glitch I have run into, and I always forget like what causes it when it happens. And another little trick I like to use with vector lines is when I'm coloring, like when I leave a sketch open like this and I'm coloring it, I don't like how scribbly and messy it looks at the bottom a lot of the time. So what I like to do is just make a line at the bottom like this, and then I'll select where I need to color. And then what you can do is just select one of the anchor points on a line and hit Control X, and it's filled in really nicely and it's nice and smooth and even. And so that's basically everything that I do to incorporate vector lines into my workflow. Vector lines are really easy and fun to work with, especially if you are really impatient like me and don't like having to redraw lines over and over again.